Much of corporate media is government controlled. Now we're in a situation where that 20% of the population that was functionally hypnotized by the propaganda that was deployed is still deeply entrenched in the narrative and unable to hear anything which contradicts their belief system. Don't shy away from taking on new things. I think that this has to grow organically from the individual up. It begins with ourselves.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Sovereign Health Podcast. My name is Andy Schoonover, and we're on a mission to inspire radical personal responsibility for both the financial and physical aspects of your health. We get the joy of hosting thought leaders who are reimagining how healthcare is delivered. Dr. Robert Malone is on the podcast today. He's an American physician with an MD from Northwestern University. He was instrumental in creating the mRNA technology, which is currently being used in COVID-19 vaccines. We're excited to have him on the podcast today. Dr. Malone, welcome to the Sovereign Health Podcast. We are honored to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. And thanks for taking the time and having the interest.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my first question for you, having been in a startup for the last 3 years and just how taxing that feels to be, it feels like you've been in a pretty taxing situation for the last 3 years as well. And so I'm just wondering, how do your wife, you just said you had kids before we started, how did they hold up through some of this stuff?
Well, my heart goes out to you. I have done multiple startups myself. And
you know how it is then, right?
I know all about how it is. And I've spent way too much time pitching business plans to West Coast venture capitalists and talking about, Series A and Series B and seed and all that stuff. And somehow in all of that, I never did get rich. So just... that's I must be the anomaly because everybody else that has startup gets rich. How has it been? Complicated answer. It's obvious we have destroyed our long existing consulting operation through speaking out, and that potentially could have been a major problem. Fortunately, Substack exists, and Steve Kirsch recommended long ago, right after the Brett Weinstein podcast, that I get on Substack, and then the Joe Rogan hit happened, and my world turned upside down, and my Substack exploded. So that's a good outcome. And so now my wife and I are full-time writers and observers, and I guess in a sense thought leaders with our essays, our presence on social media. I eventually got put back on to Twitter, still banned from LinkedIn.
I saw that this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's, and we have a book out, and we have another book nearing completion now that's focused on Psy-War and sovereignty. And we live and die by Substack these days. Only a small fraction of our subscribers pay, and that's voluntary, but it's enough to keep us going. Horse sales are down. The economy is horse sales, because we have a kind of a high-end horse farm with Lusitanos, and they're always a leading economic indicator. When people get tight, suddenly for some reason they don't want to drop $20,000 to $50,000 on a horse. I can't understand why. So there's that. The dynamics of all of this, the constant attacks from corporate media and paradoxically from people that otherwise you would think would be on your side, those ones in particular have been hard on me. And I've been counseled by more senior experienced people in the media and celebrity space that I should just let it, water off the duck's back and not be bothered by the vile, nasty things that people say that are unfounded. But the Uh, Part of what makes me who I am is that I have spent most of my life trying to become and develop empathy for people. And I think that if I was to harden my heart so that these things didn't hurt so much, I would have to also lose a lot of that I've spent so much time trying to develop. And so it's kind of one of these yin yang things where it's the price you pay, that you have a certain vulnerability to the hate and aggression that comes across. And in our business, we're very sensitive to what our audience says and believes and thinks, particularly our Substack audience, but also on social media. And so my wife and I monitor that quite closely, which means we're reading the hate as well as the accolades. And for some reason, the accolades I just brush off because I don't want to get wrapped up in thinking that I'm so great, and yet the hate penetrates my heart. So that's been more rough. We don't have as much personal time. We have been traveling an insane amount, and we tried to dial it back. We did over 450,000 miles on commercial air last year.
Wow.
And this year, we have dialed it back some, but it looks like through January, the schedule is going to get wicked again. And I have multiple trips here stateside. I just got back from a 3-city tour over 3 days, and then really 4-city tour. And then it looks like London, the Netherlands, Belgium, Romania, and Japan, as well as San Diego, Orlando, and Dallas, all within the next month and a half.
That's crazy.
So that gets a little wearing.
Yeah, I can imagine. There was some point when I'm sure you had this. There was a decision point where you said, "I'm either gonna come out and express what I think is right, or not." Did you have any idea at that point that the fork in the road that you took, in terms of taking the stepping out and saying, I'm gonna tell people what I think, what I know here? Did you have any idea at that point that it was going to turn into what it turned into over the last few years?
Well, I don't think anybody could have anticipated this explosion of attention, notoriety. I'll say that's a neutral term. Some would say I'm famous, others would say I'm infamous. It was a little bit incremental. It started with me deciding, basically carefully, cautiously. I was still self-censoring quite a bit on social media. And I had a phone call with a primary care physician in Toronto who told me about what was going on in Canada and the enticement with ice cream to children and the deletion of adverse event reports and those kinds of things. And he was begging for my assistance and in intervention with Canadian Health Authorities, Health Canada, which I don't have the contacts for. But I woke up in the morning, Sunday morning, and said, I know what we could do. Is my wife and I are both extremely well trained in bioethics. And so I wrote, I think, what is the first clear, unambiguous bioethics piece about what was going on, and published it in Trial Site News. And that I had thought at the time that was a safe space. It was, so straightforward, so unequivocal to talk about the ethics of this that wasn't going to get me in trouble and destroy my business. But I immediately started getting attacked. And then I did a couple of smaller podcasts, and Steve Kirsch recommended that I go with him to visit Brett Weinstein and do that Dark Horse podcast that had a few million views before YouTube demonetized Brett over that. And that the sin there was that Brett talked about ivermectin. By the way, it wasn't what I said about the vaccines. Paradoxically, that all came later. And then my Wikipedia within days, my Wikipedia page got aggressively edited, and the page on RNA vaccines got aggressively edited to delete me out of it. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I started getting attack articles that were totally unfair. Notoriously, I had written 2 op-eds with Peter Navarro in the Washington Times, really quite modest, saying recommendations for public policy in the outbreak, including distribution of test kits to homes and focusing on those with greatest risk rather than the general population for the vaccines and the drugs, and counseling about the risks of widespread vaccination using a leaky vaccine in the face of a lot of virus pressure, and that would just cause viral evolution. Everything that I've said has come to pass through all of these things, but they sick fact checkers on you that have at most an undergraduate biology degree in most cases. I did a American Thought Leaders with Jan Jekielek and Epoch Times when we were all still quite naive, and then Epoch Times got hammered by the fact checkers unjustifiably. Washington Times was shocked when they got basically deplatformed by Facebook for allowing Peter and I to publish our op-ed. And before that, Jill and I had published a book in February of 2020 on how to prepare and protect yourself from the novel coronavirus. And that had been deleted and deplatformed by Amazon for the sin of violating community standards. And it was it was basically written for our neighbors by a PhD and an MD that had detailed knowledge about biodefense and vaccines and infectious disease. So, with 100 references, but there was no appealing that one. So we've kind of had this gradual ratcheting down. And then after the Dark Horse podcast, oh boy, the hammer came down.
Yeah.
And then I was deplatformed from LinkedIn and Twitter for the sin of reposting the Canadian COVID Care Alliance slide deck about the, what's now widely accepted as the frauds that occurred with the Pfizer clinical trials and the data analysis from Pfizer. And that was still conservative. We didn't know all that we know now.
Yeah.
And so I got deplatformed and then from both, and then almost simultaneously, I was recording the Joe Rogan podcast hit that I understand up until Bobby's Joe Rogan interview, that was the biggest one so far. And he put that out. He thought that was so important that he put it out New Year's Eve. In that, I, among other things, I talked about Matthias Desmet's hypothesis about mass formation, using the term mass formation psychosis, which is one term that was used in the early Matthias Desmet podcasts. And the entire Silicon Valley lost its cookies over that. And Google started hand editing the search results to redirect them towards somebody who had been, an obscure podcaster who'd cut a podcast critical of the theory that had like 30 hits at the time. And suddenly that became the lead Google hit. And then it just rolled on from there. It's not very pleasant to have the Associated Press and Rolling Stone and Mother Jones and Business Insider and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Atlantic Monthly all run hit pieces on you. I can tell you that. But
where does the vitriol come from? I mean, you typically see this vitriol when there is some emotion, oftentimes fear. Why do you think there's such a vitriolic lashing of you?
One thing I'm quite confident about, because this has all triggered me to spend an inordinate amount of time thinking and writing about fifth generation warfare, propaganda, and psyops, which is the focus of the new book, as well as our efforts to disambiguate what has happened during the COVID crisis and who the puppet masters are and all that, which is the first book, Lies My Government Told Me. And I think that first off, much of corporate media is government controlled now, and the intelligence community has basically reactivated Operation Mockingbird, which they had put in place in the '60s and said they would never do that again. So, for instance, the quote reporter that interviewed me from the New York Times appears to have had CIA ties. It's just one example. And so there all the way through, there's been a coordinated government, all of government effort, and that includes DOD and the Psy-War divisions of DOD, to maintain message integrity. I'm going to choose neutral words around the proposition that any information that could cause the public to become vaccine hesitant must be suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter whether that information is true or false. In other words, whether it's a fringe conspiracy theorist talking about programmable nanobots and graphene oxide, or if it's a physician scientist who literally invented the core platform technology and has deep, intimate understanding and 30 years experience in vaccine development, it didn't matter. And I think that my background and my demeanor in particular in the content has been perceived as particularly threatening to the approved narrative. Perhaps I flatter myself in that, but I think that that's been part of it. And we absolutely have had the phenomena that Matthias Desmet describes, this mass hypnosis or mass psychosis or mass formation process. And you can see it in retrospect in a lot of the crazy things that were said at the height of the COVID crisis and the policies that were put in place, like we're not going to provide life-saving transplants unless you take the jab, and all the advocacy for herding the unjabbed into concentration camps, essentially like in New York State, and the various statements by ostensible comedians and other influencers that as far as they were concerned, the unvaccinated could die, and the whole logic that the unvaccinated were responsible for the outbreak and for deaths. And, it all just went on and on. None of that was fact-based. And all of it, in retrospect, was a huge, huge overreach at a minimum. So society did go a little bit, as I said on Rogan, barking mad. And I think that's undeniable. And now we're in a situation where that 20%, perhaps, of the population that was functionally hypnotized by the propaganda that was deployed is still deeply entrenched in the narrative and unable to hear anything which contradicts their belief system. And that we have the approximately 20, and these ratios persist through time, in these prior events, historically going back millennia. The 20% that are resistant to hypnosis and this kind of propaganda are all, busy patting themselves on the back saying, oh, we are so smart. We figured this out right away. And look at all those sheeple over there. There's the 60% that's in the middle that are kind of like, I just want to raise my kids, leave me alone. If I have to wear a mask, I will. And if you force me to take a vaccine, I will. But if you don't force me, well, I'm
sure
not particularly motivated. And those ones still are kind of with the narrative. They tend historically, that middle 60% or 50%, give or take, tends to go with whomever they believe to be dominant. The apparent leaders and dominant narrative tends to sway that 60% of the persuadable middle. And the key issue here is, as far as I'm concerned, those that are, let's say, I hate to pick sides, but let's say are on the side of truth or objectivity, as from where I see it. We have a tendency to kind of do like the other side does. Hooray for our side. We hate all you guys over there that did all this to us, and we're the smart ones. We figured it out, and you're the sheep, and yay for us. And that is absolutely counterproductive. That's not the way to reach the middle. And unless you can convince the middle that this is the right path forward, and these are reasonable, rational people, and there is a better way forward and a better plan than the official narrative and policies that are being so actively promoted by the administrative state, they're going to go along with what they see as the dominant force, which will basically default to the government's position. And so that's the challenge for me. This is basically my big challenge, is to remain a level-headed voice of reason in a world in which all around me people are going nuts. Yeah. And I try hard. Occasionally I can get a little pissy on Twitter if I'm getting attacked continuously, and I apologize for that. I try not to do that. And anytime I do, you can rest assured my wife immediately reprimands me. So you don't have to out there in the audience for you.
I won't do it. I'm curious, and I hope you take this the right way. You've been around for a little bit longer than I have, but you just said that middle 60%, almost by default, I think I interpreted this correct, by default just kind of goes with whatever the most powerful force says is the right thing, and in this case is the government. Has that 60% always been that 60%? Has that changed over the last few decades? Because it feels to me like the middle 60% is way more persuaded by the government now than it ever has been. And maybe it's just my little sphere.
It may. We're all in a bubble of like-minded individuals surrounding us, because otherwise, generally, we wouldn't be interacting with them if they were radically different from us, unless we're the kind of person who actively seeks controversy and dopamine hits and stimulation through conflict. So when I refer to these ratios, they have been referred to historically, literally, for hundreds of years. And there's a fascinating interview you can look up from the early 60s from Aldous Huxley in Black and White, in which he talks about this. And of course, the author of Brave New World and the mentor of George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, and whose brother, as I recall, was instrumental in founding the United Nations, and really the logic of globalism as we know it goes back to the 30s and 40s. So fascinating intellectual British family that gave rise to Huxley. And in the interview, Huxley basically says that it's a good thing from the perspective of a government that 20% of the population is readily hypnotized or persuaded through propaganda to follow whatever the government wants. Because otherwise, population would be completely ungovernable. And that the 60%, with this kind of general bias, that's also adaptive, but that the world and societies need this 20%, of which maybe 5%, 3 to 5% are really often radicalized truth warrior types. The ones that gave rise to the American Revolution and staffed it was in that 3 to 5% range. That society needs these as change agents. And so he makes the argument, basically a Darwinian argument, social Darwinism, that this is all adaptive. Others might assert that this is all by design and from the higher authority of whatever their monotheistic religion is. But it seems to have persisted over time. And the earliest historic reference I can find to this is in Plato's Republic, in which he speaks of the allegory of the cave. And if your viewers aren't familiar with that, there's some great philosophy videos you can watch about it if you want to quickly dive into it. But it's a fantastic metaphor of a group of individuals chained to the floor of a cave, a darkened cave, watching the shadows on the wall that are projected by the true power brokers. And then one of them escapes the cave, sees the true light, sees the nature of the world. It's all a metaphor. Comes back into the cave and tries to convince his former buddies and colleagues that they're all being lied to. And they're obsessing over things that are irrelevant, the interpretation of the shadows. And they all reject him. Like, get out of here. I don't know what you're talking about. And then there's the myth, the hero's journey that is spoken about at length and is the basis for the Star Wars series and so many others.
Yeah. Are you in that 3 to 5%? Are you in that Revolutionary War, group?
I think I probably am at this point. It's in for a penny, in for a pound. When these attacks and vilification and defamation started by corporate media, knowing that for the prior 20 years of my career, I had often interacted with high-end corporate media, usually off the record as a subject matter expert, and had previously been one of the key whistleblowers in the Jesse Gelsinger death with Jim Wilson, that this gene therapy death, many's forgotten about this, that hit UPenn. And I spoke at length to both national and international press, including Cheryl Gay Stolberg. I was a main source for her articles, which made her career for the New York Times. I was, used to interacting with press, and then as this developed and I started speaking out, I was just shunned. No interest in talking to this guy Malone. What does he know? And then there was all of the propaganda and marketing efforts to try to get Carrico and Weissman the Nobel Prize, which of course eventually came to pass. And writing me out of history and all. So basically, as this started to happen, my wife and I kind of had a powwow. We said, "What the hell are we going to do about this? This is a whole new game. This is, I've been through many outbreaks. This is kind of my specialist. Talk about dopamine hits. I get my dopamine hits from outbreaks historically, so we said, well, clearly corporate media is captured and they're not playing nice. And if we want to get the truth out and our message out, we're just going to have to dive headlong into this new thing called alternative media and social media, which is why I now sit in a studio that we probably dropped $80,000 into here on my farm in an old pig barn, broadcasting in stereo at 1080/60 from a 4-camera rig. It's what I've learned over time is if you want to reach the audience, you have to provide a high quality product, both in terms of broadcast and in terms of written content in Substack. So I threw myself into the podcast. I would take every podcast that asked me, and back then I was, I would do 5 or 6 a day.
Wow,
exhausting. Fortunately, that's kind of cooled off. I don't complain about that. I'm not doing this for fame. That was one of the early accusations, is I was seeking fame and personal recognition. Trust me, that is not what I would far rather hang out with my wife here on the farm, not travel all the time, ride my bloody horses, and do what I needed to do in terms of regulatory documents and clinical trial stuff to make ends meet and pay for hay. But that's not been the way the dice have been rolled.
Yeah.
And once in it, two key things. And there are others in this space that actively cultivate a cult of personality around themselves, and they are actively seeking to capture as much money as they can and as much attention as they can. And I'm not going to name names, so don't ask. But that's not me. I don't grift. I don't sell vitamins. I don't try to pitch, air purifiers or whatever.
Do you get a sense, though, that the 3 to 5% that we've been talking about, they're not in it for the fame, are they? Or, I mean, it feels like these folks are what I call missionaries.
There are folks in this space. So there are absolutely chaos agents and disruptors. And I'm pretty sure that a number of them are paid. And again, I could name names, but let's not go there right now. And I've written about this on my Substack. I usually talk about things and people in the abstract. I rarely mention names unless it's necessary. But there absolutely are some people that identify or are identified as leaders in this movement that are very active in trying to develop kind of a cult around themselves, and in seeking publicity, and in seeking to accumulate wealth through both donations, book sales, sales of vitamins and supplements, et cetera. Now, for instance, FLCCC, just to be clear, so we're not confused, Paul Merrick and Pierre Corey, that operation is a not-for-profit, and they don't sell supplements or vitamins. Mm-hmm. They do have the protocols that they put up, and they do get donations to support that, and they do some telemedicine work, but they're compensated equitably for that. They're highly accomplished physicians. And
it feels like it's like the 3 to 5% is mission first, money second, right? As from what I have gathered. I mean, if you think about some of
in many cases, money is way down the stack.
Yeah,
a lot of this is not, unless you're actively grifting in some way. This is not lucrative. I don't get big speaker fees. Tony Fauci does. Not me. I did this 4-city tour, and one of those I got a modest honorarium for in Pittsburgh, but I was on my feet teaching for 13 hours. Mm-hmm. The Las Vegas one was to support Matt Mercy Schlapp as they were trying to fundraise for CPAC, and they covered my room and airfare, but that was that. Mm. And then I flew back to Pittsburgh, did that 13-hour stint, jumped in the car at 4 a.m. with Jill, drove to Rochester, and then did a full day with Shannon Joy for her event, and then drove back home. It was an 8-hour drive, and I don't think Shannon provided free lodging in Rochester. That was that. So this is not a way to get rich. And of course, through all that, Substack is what supports us. And so it's not enough to just be shuttling back and forth and giving talks or podcasts like this. This is my third one today out of 4. But we have to put out the Substack day after day after day, or I don't get paid. And the horses go hungry.
And you are regular, right? It is almost every day that you guys come out with a new
Pretty
Substack
much.
article.
We are like, since we started this a little bit before Rogan, so that's 2 winters ago. Was that 22, winter of 22, I think, December 31st.
I think that's right.
So it's like November of that year, we started publishing, and we're like at 850 essays so far.
Wow.
So yeah, it's sometimes it's 2 to 3 a day, but that's if you want, our Substack is one of the largest. And then we also maintain about 2 million followers across Twitter or X, Gab, Getter, Truth Social. And the Substack is 320, 330,000. And often we hit about 500,000 readers a day through the Substack. So that's the Washington Post daily circulation is about 2 million. And CNN's daily viewership is closer to 500,000. So we're starting to hit routinely the same number of eyeballs that CNN is hitting, which has been repeatedly mentioned as a low bar and falling lower. We're only two people.
I love it. I love it. Well, the reason I keep kind of going back to this 3 to 5%, it was a stat that you threw out there, is, many of our members feel like they're in that 3 to 5%. They are folks who have vocally been against the Federal Reserve and the printing of money over the last 3 years, and the inflation that comes from that.
You have Bitcoin folks.
A bunch of Bitcoin folks. And they are kind of castigated because they're like, why can't you support these big federal programs? Because they're saving, poor people, and, all this hogwash around what the government has done.
They will enjoy the Substack that I just published about an hour and a half ago on the Chevron deference, which is the major, as I put it, the keystone of the administrative state. It was put in place in '84, which is ironic, by the Supreme Court. It's a lot of people, a lot of constitutional lawyers are of the opinion that is on the threshold of getting overturned.
Yeah.
And the Chevron deference is what has enabled the explosion of power of the administrative state and its overreach. Yeah. And if that gets overturned, I want to say we have a brave new world. We are in a different place. What it looks like on the other end of that pipeline, I don't know. And of course, this is all coming concurrent. As your viewership is aware, the federal debt is unsustainable. Yeah. You're being pulled into, is it going to be 3 or 4 wars? And we've had basically forever war for most of the 20th century or 21st century now. And we've just been bled dry by our military industrial complex, and now by our defense industrial complex, and increasingly by our censorship industrial complex. And what comes out of the other end of this sausage maker, I don't know. But it's not looking pretty.
It's scary. The other kind of group of folks that are members of CrowdHealth and listen to this are those who believe that the government has had a significant impact on the food we eat,
Yes,
the medicine that we are getting provided, a very kind of Western medicine, which, you know a lot about, pharmaceuticals over kind of a natural, holistic.
Here's one for you. Paul Merrick, one of the most highly published intensive care physicians in the world, has, after having, because he's experienced the same kind of stuff, for the sin of advocating for ivermectin and early treatment. Mm-hmm. And he's lost his job at Virginia Hospital, et cetera, over this. He's now to the point where he doesn't believe any peer-reviewed literature.
Wow.
And he's going back and rethinking and reinvestigating largely more holistic naturopath or integrative medicine approaches, in particular with his latest work to cancer. And there's a whole school of thought that there are significant capabilities, let's say, in naturopathic herbal cancer treatments that are suppressed and overlooked by because they're off patent and the big pharma can't make money. And your listeners are probably attuned to the fact that there's a big push nationally and internationally to try to suppress availability of herbal, supplemental, and naturopathic remedies. This is happening all through the Western world in a harmonized fashion. Obviously, suspicion is this thrust vector is all capitalized by Mr. Pharma.
That was going to be my next question. Is this the pharma industry trying to, basically play in every part of our lives, whether it be from, a vaccine for
why wouldn't they?
COVID? I mean,
having worked with this industry for much of my life,
you would know better than anybody, I think, probably.
As academic, and then at working for a Gates-funded organization called ARIS-TB Vaccine Foundation and PATH, and working for mid-size pharma Solvay. These organizations, particularly pharma, they're not real big on ethics. They are absolutely driven by profit, and if they can squeeze more profit out of a situation by marketing, by legal or illegal means, by bankrolling politicians' campaigns, they'll do it.
Yeah.
It's all, anything goes unless you get caught. And it's very much catch me if you can. And that's the pervasive ethic of this pharmaceutical complex, which has inculcated itself deeply into medicine, particularly Western medicine, and all of the support infrastructure for Western medicine, the various really guilds that are built around medical specialties. So the various surgeons, oncologists, all the medical specialties that have specialty boards are functionally guilds, and they have central guild organizations that manage their licensure activities, and they've literally all been subverted by pharma money, as has the American Medical Association and pretty much all of the journals. So pharma has found a way to work its will throughout the entire infrastructure. And this really went in hyperdrive, another Star Trek metaphor, sorry. Let me tell you a story. I had a film crew come out, shoot a bunch of film related to their upcoming documentary about the mRNA vaccine story. And the lead investigative journalist in that, Francis Delier, took me aside and he said, "Hey, there's something you need to know about, Robert, from a Swiss perspective. Edward Kennedy basically made a deal with Novartis. And when he pushed through the legislation that authorized pharma to use broadcasting television to market their products, which is illegal in most of the world. And also part of that deal that resulted in congressional legislation involved the decision by the government not to negotiate with pharma for cost reductions in many drugs, on-patent drugs. And so there was this deal struck, and the quid pro quo, according to Francis, was that Novartis pulled up stakes in Switzerland, where it had its headquarters, Novartis being, if not the largest, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and relocated corporate headquarters to Boston. And with that cluster of events, the entire industry was transformed. It became a monster in terms of generating revenue. And it turned that revenue back rather than, the justification was, well, we need all this profit because we're doing such great work with our research and development, and it's so expensive, it's so risky. We just have to charge this, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And what they did was they took a lot of that profit revenue, and rather than sinking it back into new products, which have become increasingly difficult, by the way, the low-hanging fruit has all been harvested. What they did is they sunk it back into essentially lobbying. And to a significant extent, they capitalize all of our elections down to the level of school board. And that has allowed them to capture both the legislative branch and the executive branch of the U.S. government down to, as I say, local levels through state governments. And that's a real hard one to break.
Yeah.
It's been baked in pretty hard.
And so that's the question as we've got people listening to this who are trying to fight the financial system, the World Economic Forum, the banks, on the money side. We have people fighting against big food and the stuff that they're, putting into our food.
Mr. Gates is all over that.
Yeah. And then the medical industrial complex, which between hospitals and pharmaceutical companies and health insurance plans generate $4.3 trillion, in the United States, which is, I think, the fourth largest GDP if it were a country after, Japan, China, and the United States. You have taken a stand that clearly has had an impact, life impact. But I think a lot of the people listening to this are, like I said, the 3 to 5%ers who are saying, I see a wrong, I see an injustice. I want to stand up to, very, very powerful players, similarly to the way that you have. What advice would you have for those people who are like, I'm on mission, I want to change the world because I see an injustice? I'd love just your perspective, given what you've gone through over the last 3 years.
God bless you. And thank you. I say that in all sincerity. There is common cause here. It's been observed because one of the characteristics of many of these people is they're libertarians. And as Nigel Farage said to me, it must have been 6 or 8 months ago when I saw him in London over dinner and so Nigel Farage, the British Brexit politician.
Yeah.
He said, well, the problem with our side is we're all libertarians, and libertarians by nature don't get along well with each other, and they don't talk. And he said, what you have to do is that I can't mimic him well enough because I haven't been with him lately. But what he said was, what you have to do is to come up with some terminology that reflects your common purpose. And in our case, we came up with Brexit as a term, and then we could all agree with Brexit. And once we had that defined, and it took us 2 to 3 years to come to that point, then we were able to build momentum and, of course, had a major success that now the Conservatives are busy, backpedaling on in the UK. But that was Nigel's recommendation, is to find common cause and define something that we can all agree on, and then focus on that. So that's one version of it. I think that this has to grow organically from the individual up. I'm a big fan, and obviously I've been with the physicians who have been at the on the front line, physicians and scientists trying to repurpose existing drugs off patent, rather than the big pharma and government with their top-down approach. I've been with the bottom-up approach. So that's kind of innately how I'm wired anyhow. But I think that it begins with ourselves and our own soul, our own ethical framework. And I also personally believe that one of the ways out of the woods here is to go back, and this is 2 steps back and 1 step forward, to go back to, let's say, Judeo-Christian ethics and some of the more traditional structures that have served society and civilizations well over millennia.
Amen.
One of them being and I don't want to say trad wife. My wife slaps me for that. Trad wife has come to mean this traditional wife that she cooks and cleans, and
I could see why your wife would slap you.
and the man goes out and hunts the deer, or whatever the metaphor is. But a modern but also traditional marriage is historically been the foundation stone for stable society, and there's a lot of good that comes with long-term monogamous relationships, including fostering the next generation and giving them the security and training and role models that they need to succeed in life. So I'm a big. Obviously, I live on a farm, and I actively farm it. People think, "Oh, you're just a gentleman farmer because you have horses." Well, I still got to go shovel the poop and and drive the tractor and buck the hay, etc. As I have done for much of my life. This is our sixth small farm, so I'm a big fan of self-reliance. In this farm, we actually did homestead it, quite literally, or farmsteaded it from raw hayfield up to the point where it's at right now, 7 years later. So I'm in terms of the underlying ethic. I had the benefit, because we used to breed draft horses, of hanging out with Amish and Mennonites a bit. And they're among the very few that know how to make a small farm work. And they have a whole different ethic about work and family and those kinds of things. It's not perfect. There's a lot of ugly in those cultures that we don't need to go into, but there's a lot of positive there too. So I think it has to start with you as an individual. You have to get in touch with your soul, with who you are and what your ethics are. You have to commit to those. And remember that, and I've seen this again and again, when you compromise because of whatever the driver is, you've got to pay your mortgage or your car payments, instead of having bought a used car and sticking it out and fixing it when it's broken, you decided to go ahead and get that shiny new Ford. When you do that, each time you kind of sell a little tiny bit of your soul. Each time you make a compromise and you say, for instance, I'm not going to speak out about that. I'm not going to make waves at work, even though this isn't right. And I know it's not right, and I can feel in my heart that it's not right. Every time you do that, you lose a little bit of that key thing inside of you that makes you a whole person, and eventually you end up with a shell. And there are worse things than dying, and losing your soul is right at the top of that list. And you think as you speak out, I had the advantage of having been through the over the falls in a barrel once before, because I was a whistleblower and I destroyed my academic career by doing it. But I found through that the people around me that were my true friends continued and perhaps even enhanced their respect for me, continued to be my friends, and created a safety net that allowed me to thrive and to bridge into a new career and a new life. And I'm glad I'm no longer an academic. My wife was reminding me the other day, if I had stayed in academia, I would not be the person that I am right now. So this whole thing that you if you want to get theological, God has a plan for you or whatever it is, but don't shy away from taking on new things and undergoing change. Especially if you're in that 3 to 5% of warriors, be a warrior, and don't allow them to make you a victim. There's so much effort to victimize, and of course, self-victimization, victim theory is at the core of wokeism.
Yeah,
and don't buy into that. Don't allow that I refuse to find myself as a victim in any of this, and choose a self-image that is consistent with that thing in your heart. And warrior obviously is something that those of us in the 3 to 5% all generally can agree on. But there's a lot of variation in the warrior model. There's warrior mentors and nurturers, and there's more pure educators or pure nurturers, and those are good roles too. Just don't allow them to frame you as a victim, and they will attempt to do so. So there's some general guidance. Be true to your soul. Recognize there's worse things than dying, and when you come to that point where you say, "Okay, I could die if I do this. So what? At least I'll die, with courage and in personal integrity." It's really freeing when you experience that. You're so afraid. You get so latched onto all your things and all the stuff around you that you think is you, that defines you, that bolsters you up, that makes you feel more important. All that stuff, all those toys, they used to have the bumper sticker,
totally.
Who dies with the most toys wins. And if you realize that all of that can fall away and you can still be happy, because it doesn't give you happiness, and that the things that will give you long-term happiness are long-term interpersonal relationships, whether it's your wife, your children, or third parties, and maintaining those relationships and deepening them. That's what matters, not all of the toys and the accessories. Then the prospect of losing those toys and accessories is no longer such a big deal.
Yeah, totally.
And then you're set free. So this is, in the world of decentralized cyber currency and alternative lifestyles, and the pejorative preppers. What's a prepper anymore? It's like a realistic person that's planning ahead. We've all become preppers in our 20% or 5% of necessity, because we're looking at the world going, oh shit, what comes next? And the Mormons, I think they generally have this guidance that you should have about 6 months of food stocked up. Not a bad idea. That's not crazy religiousness. That's just common sense. In these kind of changing worlds, and what's the ultimate fallback position? There's a school of thought. Ayn Rand is immature and two-dimensional and not very practical. And I tell you, when I burned through the Ayn Rand books, it changed my life, and that's why our Substack is called "Who is Robert Malone?" is a tip of the hat to John Galt. And
I love that.
Remember that I have very much kept in mind that the ending of that book is that John Galt is tortured by the bureaucrats. So when they stick their needles in me and their hot pokers, I kind of say, okay, well, I accepted this long ago, trajectory, and it's the price you got to pay, and don't complain about it. And in many ways, our farm here is my little version of Galt's Gulch. I sit here in an old pig barn broadcasting, and right across the way there is what was once a store and a house that we're restoring as a conference center, so that people can come and share ideas and break bread together, etc. From all walks of life. That's the intention, and I have come to thrive and just embrace this little rural community that I live in, Madison, Virginia, and the county has the same population it had in World War II. And they embrace me. It's a little bizarre. I'm a local hero, and and the cops love me. That's a little weird.
There you go. Well, that's a good thing. Well, if I were a prepper, I would probably want to be not too far from where you are. I am a once proud graduate of the University of Virginia. They have gotten a little loco in their political standings lately, but not too far from you. So I love that part of the country. I'm just appreciating. I know that you get on podcasts all the time and talk about RNA, mRNA, vaccines and things like that. I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach to do, because given what you have gone through, many of our listeners, go through in much kind of less dramatic way. So I appreciate the advice that you have for folks, the wisdom there. And so thank you again for being willing to jump on our tiny little podcast, but it is full of people who are.
I don't apologize. I'm sincerely. This is an affect.
Oh, great. Well, I appreciate that.
Each podcast is a separate community with community leaders and its own ethics and philosophy. And each time I feel like I'm being invited into kind of somebody's home or into their community, and I'm honored and grateful. And just because you're not Joe Rogan doesn't mean you're not important, and that the community that you represent isn't important. I can't, these are like little seeds.
Yeah, I love that.
As we go along, we're, planting seeds, and we never know which ones are going to grow and thrive.
Yeah.
And whose life we're going to touch. And that's the joy in life, isn't it?
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Well, I know that you have another podcast coming up here. I sincerely appreciate it. Dr. Robert Malone, thanks for coming on.
And thanks for having me, sincerely. And let's do it again soon.
Would love that.